everyone, and welcome to our lesson 6.3 on percent equations. So to provide some feedback, we've been using proportions to find parts, wholes, and percents. But now in this section, we're going to be using percent equations to do the same thing. And a couple of things you need to remember with percent equations is one, you must change your percent to a decimal. And we do that by moving the decimal point 2 spaces to the left. And second, of becomes multiplication. So let's go ahead and move on to two practice problems. First one we have here, your class raised 80% of its $8,000 goal for a trip. How much was raised? So in blue, I just rewrote the percent equation. You don't need to write that, but this part I do need you to write. And now we're going to fill in the parts of the equation that we know. So it says that we raised 80%, so 80 goes in the percent section, of $8,000. So when I find 80% of 80,000, that's going to give me the part that I'm looking for. So I'm going to put n, since I don't know what the part is. So to solve for this, I'm just going to rewrite 80% as 0.80, because the decimal moves back 2 spaces to the left, 1, 2. Of becomes multiplication. Then I multiply 80 hundredths times 8,000, and I get, looking at my work to the right, you should get $6,400. And you want to check to make sure your answer makes sense. So 80% is a pretty big chunk of 8,000. So 6,400 is a good size amount of 8,000. So my answer does make sense. Okay, copy this down, and if you need to pause the video so you can get this down. Now I'm going to move on to the second practice problem. Oh, but one thing before I move on, I just wanted to make sure you're aware that when you're multiplying with decimals, remember that your decimal has to be in the same place value or in the same spot after you count your decimal digits in your problem. So here I have 2 decimal digits. Therefore, in my answer, I will have 2 decimal digits as well. For practice problem number 2, we have what number is 40% of 150? So if you look above, I wrote the percent equation out. You don't need to write that. But what I want you to do on your own is write the percent equation that represents this problem. So go ahead and pause the video now so you can write it on your own. Pause. And for your equation, you should get the following. N is equal to 40% of 150. Let me rewrite that more clearly. 40% of, and the reason why you know that it's of 150 is because when you look at the wording, the number that follows of is usually referring to the whole number. So when you solve this, you're going to change of to multiplication times 150. Your percent becomes a decimal. So go ahead and solve this and find n. And pause the video now so that you can do it on your own before you see the rest of the work. Go ahead and pause. And for my answer, I got 60, or 60.00. And I know that there's a quicker way to multiply, so instead of multiplying by 0.40, you can also multiply by just 0.4, since 40 hundredths is the same as 4 tenths. But either way, you should get 60. So let's move on ahead to the next problem. Pause this part if you need to copy down the work. For this section of our notes, we're now transitioning to finding the whole. So we're still using the same equation, but because of the information given, we're going to be filling in different parts. So here I have 117 is 45% of what number? And since I don't know what that number is, I'm going to have 117 is 45% of n, since that is my unknown. So when you solve for n in this situation, you're going to have 117 is equal to 45 hundredths, changing my decimal to percent, times n, and I can just rewrite this as 117 is equal to 45 hundredths n. Now from this point, what should you do to both sides of the equation to solve for n? Well, if I want n by itself, I need to get rid of that 45 hundredths. In order to get rid of that, I need to undo the multiplication. So I'm going to divide both sides by 45 hundredths. And when I divide, this is the tricky part. Remember that top number goes in, bottom number goes out. Now when you divide, you don't want to have a decimal digit on the outside or a decimal number. So here, my divisor, which is called the divisor is called the number on the outside of the division house. you're going to move that decimal point 2 times to the right. And so, since math is fair, you're also going to move the decimal point from 117 2 times to the right. Now, since 117 didn't have a decimal number or decimal point, you're going to add the decimal point at the end. So my new problem is now just 117 with those 2 zeros, which becomes 11,700 divided by 45. Now, as for my division work, I just go ahead and start getting the quotient. So 45 cannot go into 1, 45 cannot go into 11, but 45 can go into 117 twice. 2 times 45 is 90. Subtract that, and I have 7 minus 0 is 7, and a 1 minus 9 I can't do, so I have to borrow and regroup, and that leaves me with 11 minus 9 is 2. Bring down my next digit. 45 goes into 270. Let me guess, maybe about 6 times, and let me just double check. 6 times 5 is 30. 6 times 4 is 24, plus that 3 is 27. Oops, sorry, not addition, that should be subtraction. So subtract that, I have no remainder, but I bring down another 0, and 45 goes into 0 times. And the reason why I bring that 0 down is because it's still there. I can't just ignore it. So n is equal to 260, which makes sense because 117 is 45%, and 45% is about half. So this is about half. So 117 is about half of what number? And 117 is close to half of 260. If you need to, go ahead and copy down the work. Pause the video now. And for this practice problem, I want you to attempt this on your own. So you're going to pause the video, do the work on your own, and compare with the work that I have laid out for you. So go ahead and try this problem now on your own. Pause. So as you can see, n is equal to 200. 130 is 65% of 200. And how I got that, I changed 65% to a decimal. And then once I got my decimal, I found n by dividing both sides by 65 hundredths. Now up here, when I divided 130 by 65 hundredths, since I have a decimal as a divisor, I need to move that decimal 2 times to the right. And if I do the same thing there, I need to do the same thing to my dividend inside the house. So my new problem becomes 13,000 divided by 65, and I just divided, and I end up getting 200. If you need to, copy down this work if you either made an error or had trouble completing on your own. But now I'm going to move on to the next problem, so pause if you need to. For our last two problems, we are now going to be finding the percents, but still using the percent equation. So here's how we set up the first problem. 90 is what percent of 150? So this time I have n as my percent because I'm not sure what the percent is. So when I try to solve for n percent times 150, my goal is to get n by itself. So again, what should I do to both sides to get n by itself? The inverse of multiplying by 150 is dividing by 150. So I'm going to divide both sides by 150 because that just leaves me with n percent. Now here, 90 divided by 150, I can make this easier by simplifying this fraction. So when I do 90 divided by 150, that's really just 9 divided by 15. Now you can either simplify that further if you knew to simplify that, or if you wanted to just divide, we can go ahead and divide that. So 9 divided by 15 is going to get me this long division problem, and I'm going to add a decimal point right away. And the reason why this decimal point doesn't move is because there's no decimal point on my divisor on the outside number. So I just go ahead and divide. 15 cannot go into 9, so I add a 0. So 15 can go into 90 6 times. 6 times 15 is 90, and I get no remainder. Now, I have 0.6, but I need to change 0.6 to a percent. So to change 0.6 to a percent, you have to refer back to our notes from the prior section. You have to move your decimal point 2 times to the right. So n is equal to 60%, because 0.6 is 60%. Pause the video now if you need to copy down these steps and the work. Alrighty, so now for this last problem, I want you to set up your equation on your own and do the work on your own and compare your work with mine after you've done it on your own. Okay? So go ahead and pause the video now so that you can do this part on your own. If you need a little hints or help, I can start you off by giving you the equation. So we have 50 is n% of 250. Okay, before we move on to the work, I wanted to just insert a random picture to make sure you're paying attention. So in this picture, I am holding a scorpion during a trip that I took. And in the form, I want you to write down again, what am I holding in the picture? All right, let's go back to the math. Your work should look like the following. So we have 50 is n% of 250, and I rewrote of to times. And since I want n% by itself, I needed to do the inverse of multiplying by 250. So the inverse of multiplying is dividing by 250 on both sides. And when I divided 50 divided by 250, I saw they both end in 0, so that means I can just divide both by 10. So my new problem is just 5/25. And I divided 5 by 25 to get my decimal. So 5 divided by 25 is 0.2. Now here, this is just a decimal. This does not give me my percent. So to change this decimal to percent, you got to move your decimal 2 times to the right, which gives me 20%. So please make sure your notes are completed. You answer the questions on the form, and tomorrow I will check your notes to make sure everything is there. And if you have, sorry, not tomorrow, but Thursday, and if you have any questions, please bring them up to the sub or ask your teammates. And I'll see you on Thursday. Bye-bye.